The crystalline towers of New Zephyria gleamed like frozen starlight against the purple sky as Princess Naya Crystalline stood on her palace balcony, watching the human evacuation ships descend like ungainly metal insects. Her alabaster skin, marked with the distinctive silver tracework of her noble bloodline, seemed to glow with disdain as she observed the crude vessels landing in her capital's pristine courtyard. "Your Highness," her aide, Finn, approached nervously, his own pale blue skin flickering with anxiety patterns. "The human ambassador insists we board their ships immediately. The solar storm will pass over us as they always do," Naya interrupted, her voice carrying the musical quality of her people but edged with ice. "The Zephyrians have weathered cosmic storms for millennia before these, humans, crawled out of their muddy planet." She gestured dismissively at the evacuation ships below. "Look at those primitive craft. They're barely space-worthy." Captain Jackson Rivers climbed the endless spiral stairs of the Zephyrian Palace, cursing under his breath with each step. The architectural marvel that impressed tourists seemed designed to torture anyone in a hurry. His dark hair was already damp with sweat beneath his pilot's cap, and his olive skin gleamed under the alien sun's strange light. The emergency beacon on his wrist pulsed red. They had maybe 4 hours before the solar storm hit with enough force to turn any unshielded organic matter into cosmic dust. "Princess Crystalline," he called out as he finally reached the royal quarters, slightly out of breath. "We need to leave. Now." Naya turned slowly, her movements graceful as falling snow. She was breathtaking, tall and ethereal, with silver hair that seemed to move in its own wind and eyes like chips of Arctic ice. But her beauty was matched by the cold superiority in her gaze as she looked him up and down. "Captain Rivers, I presume," she said, her accent giving his name an almost mocking lilt. "How quaint. They sent their errand boy to collect royalty." Jackson bit back his first 3 responses, all of which would have gotten him court-martialed. "Your Highness, this isn't about protocol. Class X solar storms don't care about bloodlines. We have exactly 3 hours and 47 minutes before this entire hemisphere becomes uninhabitable for the next 6 months. Uninhabitable for humans, perhaps," Naya replied, examining her perfectly manicured nails, each one carved from some kind of living crystal. "We Zephyrians are made of sterner stuff. Our ancestors survived the Great Burning when this system's star went nova. A little solar wind won't inconvenience us." "This isn't just solar wind," Jackson said, pulling out his data pad and showing her the storm readings. "This is a coronal mass ejection the size of your entire moon. The radiation levels will cook anything organic within a 50 light-minute radius." Naya glanced at the display with the sort of polite interest one might show a child's drawing. "How fascinating. Human science has always been so dramatic. Tell me, Captain, how long have your species been traveling between stars?" "A few decades." 87 years, Jackson replied through gritted teeth. 87 years, she repeated with a tinkling laugh. "We've been stellar travelers for over 3,000 years. I think we might have a slightly better understanding of cosmic phenomena than your fledgling civilization." The emergency beacon on Jackson's wrist shifted from red to urgent amber. 3 hours. "Princess, please. I'm not asking you to abandon your world permanently. Just until the storm passes. Your people." "My people," Naya said, moving to the balcony's edge where she could see the crowds of Zephyrians gathered in the courtyard below, "are not sheep to be herded by alien shepherds. Look at them." She gestured at her subjects with obvious pride. "Do they look panicked? Do they look afraid?" Jackson looked down at the gathered Zephyrians. They did indeed look calm, even serene, their pale forms glowing softly in the afternoon light. But he'd seen enough pre-disaster situations to recognize shock when he saw it. They weren't calm, they were paralyzed by the scope of the threat. "They trust their princess to protect them," he said quietly. "They're looking to you for leadership." For just a moment, something flickered in Naya's icy eyes. Uncertainty. Fear. But it was gone before Jackson could be sure. And I am leading them, she declared. By showing them that we don't cower before every cosmic hiccup that sends the humans running. This isn't about courage, Jackson said, his patience finally fraying. This is about physics. Raw, merciless physics that doesn't care about your pride or your heritage or your 3,000 years of space travel. When that storm hits, it's going to strip away your atmosphere, boil your oceans, and turn every living thing on this continent into radioactive ash. Naya's expression hardened. Get off my world, human. Take your doomsday predictions and your ugly ships and go cower behind whatever rock you call home. Zephyria does not need your salvation. The beacon on Jackson's wrist began beeping insistently. 2.5 hours. Fine, he said, his voice cold with professional disappointment. But when you change your mind, and you will, my ship will be the last one in orbit. After that, you're on your own. He turned to leave, then stopped. For what it's worth, Your Highness, I hope I'm wrong about the storm. I really do. As Jackson's footsteps faded down the spiral stairs, Naya remained on the balcony, her hands gripping the crystal railing until her knuckles went white. Behind her, Finn cleared his throat nervously. Your Highness, perhaps we should consider. We should consider nothing, Naya snapped. Prepare the palace shields. Activate the underground shelters. We'll weather this storm as we've weathered every other challenge in our history. But even as she spoke, doubt gnawed at her like acid. What if the human was right? What if her pride was about to cost her everything she'd sworn to protect? 2 hours later, the first edge of the solar storm kissed Zephyria's upper atmosphere, and the sky began to burn. Jackson watched from his ship's bridge as the storm front approached like a wall of liquid fire. His vessel, the Stardancer, was the last human ship in the system. Everyone else had jumped to hyperspace an hour ago. He'd stayed, hoping against hope that the Zephyrian princess would come to her senses. Captain, his co-pilot, Chen, called out nervously. We need to jump. Now. Storm front will hit the planet in 47 minutes. Not yet, Jackson muttered, his eyes fixed on the palace scanner readings. The Zephyrian shields were holding, but they weren't designed for this kind of punishment. Already, he could see power fluctuations in the city grid. Sir, if we don't leave in the next 10 minutes. I said not yet. On the planet's surface, Naya stood in the palace's command center, watching her world begin to die. The outer settlements had gone dark first, their shields overwhelmed by the storm's leading edge. Now the smaller cities were falling one by one, their desperate evacuation requests flooding the communication channels. Your Highness, her chief engineer reported, his voice tight with fear. The capital shields are down to 60%. The storm stronger than our models predicted. How much stronger? Naya asked, though she dreaded the answer. Nearly 3 times our worst-case scenario. The command center fell silent except for the ominous hum of overtaxed generators. Through the transparent dome above, Naya could see the sky writhing with unnatural colors as charged particles began stripping away the upper atmosphere. The underground shelters, she said quietly. How long can they sustain the population? Perhaps 6 hours, if we're fortunate. But the radiation will contaminate the groundwater, the food supplies. Your Highness, even if we survive the initial storm, we'll face a slow death by poisoning. Naya closed her eyes, the weight of her decision crushing down like the collapsing sky above. She'd been so certain, so proud, so utterly convinced of her people's superiority. Now that pride was about to become their tomb. The human ship, she whispered. Is it still in orbit? Yes, Your Highness. The Stardancer is maintaining position just outside the storm's edge. Naya's hands trembled as she activated the communication array. It took every ounce of her remaining pride to speak the words that would save her people, and shatter her own arrogance forever. Captain Rivers, she said, her voice barely audible over the growing storm. This is Princess Naya Crystalline. I was wrong. Please. My people are dying. We need your help. The response came immediately, warm with relief and free of any trace of smugness. Already on our way, Your Highness. Hold tight. We're coming. As the Stardancer dove through the burning sky toward the dying city, Naya felt something crack inside her chest, not her heart, but the wall of ice she'd built around it. For the first time in her life, she was about to place her fate in alien hands. The human hands of a man she'd dismissed as primitive, who was now risking everything to save the people who'd scorned him. As the evacuation began and Zephyrian nobles and commoners alike rushed aboard the human ship with desperate gratitude, Naya stood alone on her balcony one last time, watching her world burn. Tomorrow, she would have to face the consequences of her pride. Tonight, she could only hope that Captain Jackson Rivers was as good a man as he was a pilot. The storm swallowed her palace in sheets of cosmic fire, but by then, the Stardancer was already carrying her people toward safety, and toward a future none of them could have imagined. The research station Verdant Dream hung in orbit around Kepler 442b like a delicate glass flower, its biodomes glowing with the soft green light of alien vegetation. Dr. Zara Moonwhisper pressed her face against the observation deck's viewport, her violet skin shimmering with excitement as she gazed down at the planet's surface. The world below was a botanist's paradise, a living library of flora that had evolved in complete isolation for millions of years. Preliminary scans complete, Dr. Moonwhisper announced her research assistant, a nervous Cetian named Pip whose translucent skin flickered with anxiety patterns. The human engineering team is requesting a safety briefing before we begin surface operations. Zara's 4 eyes, 2 primary and 2 smaller secondary ones that could detect ultraviolet spectrums, rolled in unison. Her people, the Valari, had been studying dangerous flora across 17 star systems while humans were still discovering fire. The idea that she needed safety tips from a species that had nearly poisoned their own homeworld was laughable. Tell the humans their concerns are noted but unnecessary, she said, turning back to her notes. Her silver hair, which grew in delicate tendrils rather than strands, writhed gently as she moved, a sign of her concentration. I've been handling volatile plant life since before their species achieved spaceflight. Marcus Stone wiped grease from his hands as he reviewed the atmospheric readings for the 5th time. Something about this planet made his engineer's instincts scream warnings, but he couldn't pinpoint exactly what. The human contingent aboard Verdant Dream was small, just him and 2 other specialists, but they'd been hired specifically because of their experience with dangerous environments. At 32, Marcus had already survived 3 separate station disasters and 2 asteroid mining accidents. His rugged features bore a few scars from those experiences, and his brown eyes held the cautious wisdom of someone who'd learned that the universe always had new ways to kill you. The atmospheric composition is weird, he told his partner, Janet, as they ran diagnostics on the environmental suits. Too much oxygen, trace amounts of compounds I can't identify, and the electromagnetic readings are all over the place. The Valari say it's normal for a high-evolution botanical world, Janet replied, though she sounded unconvinced. Dr. Moonwhisper specifically requested that we not contaminate the surface with primitive human paranoia. Marcus snorted. Yeah, well, Dr. Moonwhisper can kiss my primitive human ass if she thinks I'm going down there without full environmental protection. The lift doors opened with a soft chime, and Zara glided in with the ethereal grace typical of her species. She was tall and willowy, with the kind of alien beauty that made humans do double takes, until she opened her mouth and reminded everyone exactly how superior she felt to every other species in the galaxy. Mr. Stone, she said, her voice carrying the melodic quality of her people but edged with impatience. I understand you're having difficulties with the safety protocols. Not difficulties, Marcus replied evenly. Concerns. This planet's giving off some weird readings, and I'd like to understand what we're dealing with before we go surface side. Zara's primary eyes fixed on him with barely concealed disdain. Mr. Stone, my species has been cataloging dangerous flora for over 2 millennia. The thorn fire of Vega 7, the screaming moss of Alpha Centauri, the crystalline death bloom of Kepler 62f, I've studied them all. This planet, while certainly interesting, poses no unusual threats to a properly trained xenobotanist. Maybe not to a Valari, Marcus said, but humans have different physiology. Different vulnerabilities. These atmospheric readings are perfectly normal for a world with accelerated plant evolution, Zara interrupted. Really, Mr. Stone, your species' tendency toward paranoia is almost pathological. Not every new world is trying to kill you. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. My paranoia has kept me alive through situations that would have turned most people into component atoms. I'm not saying we don't go down. I'm saying we go down prepared. Very well, Zara said with the tone of someone humoring a frightened child. Wear your bulky human suits. Bring your redundant safety equipment. But please try not to let your fears interfere with actual scientific work. 6 hours later, Zara stood alone in the planet's primary forest, surrounded by the most magnificent botanical specimens she'd ever encountered. The human team had remained at the landing site, setting up their safety perimeter with typical human overcaution. She'd left them to their paranoid rituals and ventured deeper into the alien wilderness. The trees here defied conventional classification. Some grew in impossible spirals, their bark shifting colors like living rainbows. Others seemed to exist partially in normal space and partially elsewhere, their branches fading in and out of visibility. Flowers the size of dinner tables nodded on stems that hummed with barely audible music. Zara's recording equipment captured everything as she moved through the forest like a dancer, her Valari physiology allowing her to navigate the complex terrain with ease. This was her element, the unknown, the beautiful, the dangerous. Each new specimen was a puzzle to solve, a secret to unlock. She was so absorbed in her work that she almost missed the warning signs. The forest had gone quiet. Zara paused, her secondary eyes scanning the ultraviolet spectrum while her primary eyes focused on the visible range. Something was wrong. The ambient electromagnetic field had shifted, and the air itself seemed to be getting thicker. That's when she saw them, the flowers. They were small, almost insignificant compared to the giant blooms she'd been cataloging. Tiny white petals arranged in perfect spheres, growing in clusters throughout the underbrush. But as she watched, the petals began to glow with a soft inner light, and the air around them started to shimmer. Fascinating, Zara murmured, approaching the nearest cluster with her scanner extended. Some kind of bioluminescent reaction to what? The scanner's readings made her pause. The electromagnetic activity around the flowers was increasing exponentially, and the chemical composition of the air was changing rapidly. Carbon dioxide was spiking while oxygen levels plummeted. The flowers were terraforming the atmosphere around them. This is impossible, Zara whispered, but even as she spoke, her breathing became labored. The Valari were adapted to higher oxygen environments than humans, this atmospheric shift was affecting her even more severely. She tried to back away, but the flower's influence extended further than she'd realized. Every step seemed to take tremendous effort, and her vision was starting to blur. The beautiful alien forest was becoming a death trap. Her communicator crackled to life, Dr. Moon whisper, this is Stone. We're reading massive atmospheric disturbances in your area. What's your status? The cargo hauler Iron Wanderer drifted through the Helix Nebula like a wounded beast, its hull scarred from 1,000 journeys through the galaxy's most dangerous shipping lanes. In the navigation chamber, Celeste Voidheart stood before a holographic star map, her obsidian skin seeming to absorb the blue light while her white hair floated around her head like captured starlight. Her people, the Nixari, were born navigators, their entire physiology evolved for life in zero gravity and deep space. The jump calculations are complete, she announced to the ship's captain, her voice carrying the ethereal quality of someone who'd spent more time in vacuum than atmosphere. We'll reach the terminus gate in 14 standard hours. Rico Thorne looked up from the engine diagnostic he'd been running, wiping sweat from his forehead with a grease-stained rag. The Iron Wanderer's chief mechanic was built like a prizefighter, broad shoulders, calloused hands, and the kind of sturdy frame that came from years of wrestling with recalcitrant machinery. His dark eyes held a mixture of admiration and frustration as he watched Celeste work. "Celeste," he said carefully, "I'm reading some concerning fluctuations in the hyperdrive matrix. Maybe we should drop out of hyperspace and run a full diagnostic before." "Mr. Thorne," Celeste interrupted without turning away from her calculations, "my people have been navigating hyperspace for 3 millennia. We were crossing between stars when your species was still bound to a single world." Her tone was polite but dismissive, the way one might address a child who'd offered to help with advanced mathematics. Rico felt his jaw tighten. They'd been having variations of this conversation for the 6 months since Celeste had joined the crew. Despite his 15 years of experience keeping ships running in the harshest environments imaginable, she treated him like an apprentice mechanic who'd stumbled onto his first starship. "I understand your people are experienced navigators," Rico said, forcing patience into his voice. "But I'm talking about the mechanical systems. The hyperdrive coupling has been showing stress fractures, and the quantum resonance chamber is running hot. These are human-built engines with human tolerances, and they're telling me they need maintenance." Celeste finally turned to face him, her silver eyes reflecting the starlight streaming through the viewports. She was beautiful in the alien way of her people, tall and elegant, with features that seemed carved from living shadow. But her beauty was matched by an arrogance that could freeze helium. "Mr. Thorne, I've plotted courses for vessels across 17 different technological paradigms. Kytherian bioships, Altarian crystal drives, even the living vessels of the deep wanderers. Your primitive fusion torch engines are hardly a mystery to me." She gestured dismissively at his diagnostic readouts. "These stress indicators you're so concerned about are well within acceptable parameters for any competent navigator." "Maybe for a Nixery ship," Rico shot back, his patience finally fraying. "But this isn't a Nixery ship. This is a 20-year-old human cargo hauler held together with spare parts and prayers. She's got quirks and limitations that don't show up in your star charts." Celeste's expression grew even colder. "Are you suggesting that I don't understand the vessel I'm navigating?" "I'm suggesting that you don't understand the difference between theoretical knowledge and practical experience," Rico replied. "I've been nursing this bucket of bolts through space for 8 years. I know every sound she makes, every vibration, every primitive superstition your species mistakes for engineering expertise," Celeste finished. "Mr. Thorne, I don't navigate by feelings or instincts. I navigate by mathematics, physics, and 3,000 years of accumulated knowledge. Your emotional attachment to this machine is irrelevant." Rico stared at her for a long moment, then shook his head. "Fine. You're the navigator. But when those engines seize up in the middle of hyperspace, don't come crying to me about how your mathematics didn't account for human engineering." He turned and walked away, leaving Celeste alone with her star charts and her absolute certainty. 12 hours later, the Iron Wanderer shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace, emergency klaxons wailing throughout the ship. Rico was already running toward the engine room before the captain's voice crackled over the intercom, "All hands to emergency stations. We have a hyperdrive failure." The engine room was a nightmare of sparking conduits and venting plasma. The hyperdrive coupling, the exact component Rico had been worried about, had finally given up under the stress of Celeste's aggressive navigation pattern. Worse, the failure had damaged the quantum containment field, and exotic matter was bleeding into the ship's normal space. "How bad is it?" Captain Morrison asked as he arrived with the rest of the crew. "Bad," Rico replied, already pulling on radiation gear. The coupling failure triggered a cascade in the quantum chamber. "We're looking at a complete engine rebuild, assuming the exotic matter leak doesn't kill us first." "How long for repairs?" Rico did quick calculations in his head, factoring in their spare parts inventory and the complexity of the work. "In a proper shipyard? 2 weeks. Out here in deep space with what we've got on hand? Maybe 3 weeks, if we're lucky." "We don't have 3 weeks," Morrison said grimly. "Life support is running on backup power, and we're in the middle of nowhere. No shipping lanes, no colonies, no rescue coming. The captain turned to Celeste, who had been standing silently in the doorway. Navigator, do we have any options? Emergency beacons, nearby systems, anything? Celeste's silver eyes were wide with something Rico had never seen in them before, fear. The nearest inhabited system is 47 light-years away. Without the hyperdrive. We're dead, Rico finished bluntly. Unless we can fix this heap of junk. Over the next several days, Rico worked 18-hour shifts in the engine room, performing miracles with salvaged parts and improvised solutions. The exotic matter leak had been contained, but barely, and the hyperdrive coupling remained a twisted mass of fused metal. Celeste tried to help at first, offering suggestions based on her theoretical knowledge of human engineering. But theory and practice proved to be very different things, and her attempts to assist often made the work more difficult. Eventually, she retreated to the navigation chamber, running calculations that became increasingly desperate as their situation grew more hopeless. It was on the fourth day that Rico found her there, surrounded by holographic star maps and mathematical projections, her perfect composure finally cracking. There has to be a way, she whispered, her voice breaking. My calculations, my knowledge, there has to be something I'm missing. Rico stood in the doorway, watching this proud alien woman confront the limits of her certainty. Her silver hair, usually perfectly arranged, hung in disheveled strands around her face. Her obsidian skin had lost its lustrous quality, and her silver eyes were red with exhaustion. Hey, he said softly, stepping into the chamber. You okay? Celeste looked up at him, and for the first time since he'd known her, there was no arrogance in her expression. Only fear, exhaustion, and something that might have been shame. I was wrong, she said simply. About the engines, about your warnings, about everything. My pride, my certainty, it's going to kill us all. Rico pulled up a chair beside her, studying the holographic displays. We're not dead yet. What are you working on? Trying to find an alternative, Celeste replied. Some way to reach an inhabited system without the hyperdrive. But conventional physics, the distances are too great. We'd need decades to reach the nearest colony. Rico leaned back in his chair, thinking. What about unconventional physics? I don't understand. You said your people have experience with different technologies. What about? I don't know, gravity manipulation. Space folding. Some kind of exotic propulsion that doesn't rely on hyperdrive. Celeste's eyes brightened slightly. There are theoretical possibilities. Ancient Nixery techniques that use stellar gravity wells to create shortcuts through spacetime. But they're incredibly dangerous, and they require precise gravitational calculations and someone who understands the mechanical limitations of this particular ship, Rico finished. Someone who knows exactly how much stress these engines can handle. For the first time in days, Celeste smiled, a real smile, not the condescending expression he was used to. Are you proposing we work together, Mr. Thorne? I'm proposing we save everyone's lives, Rico replied. You bring the theoretical knowledge, I'll bring the practical experience. Between the two of us, maybe we can jury-rig something that'll get us home. They worked together for the next week, combining Celeste's advanced mathematics with Rico's intimate knowledge of the ship's systems. It was the most intense collaboration of Rico's life, Celeste's brilliant mind matched with his hands-on expertise, creating solutions neither could have achieved alone. Slowly, a plan emerged. Using the ship's remaining power and some creative modifications to the sensor array, they could create a localized gravity distortion, essentially a miniature black hole that would bend spacetime around them. It wouldn't be as fast as hyperspace, but it might reduce their journey time from decades to weeks. It's insane, Rico said as they finalized the calculations. The power requirements alone could overload every system on the ship. But it's possible, Celeste added, her silver eyes bright with excitement and terror. The mathematics work. Barely, but they work. If we're wrong, we'll be scattered across several dimensions. If we do nothing, we die in this dead system. Rico looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since they'd started working together. Somewhere during their collaboration, the arrogant navigator had been replaced by someone he could respect. Someone he was beginning to care about in ways that went beyond professional admiration. "You know," he said quietly, "when we get out of this, I owe you an apology." "You owe me an apology?" Celeste asked, surprised. "I judged you based on your attitude instead of your abilities." "Yeah, you were arrogant and dismissive. But you're also brilliant. Probably the most brilliant person I've ever worked with." Celeste was quiet for a long moment. "And I dismissed your expertise because of my own prejudices about human engineering. Your primitive technology kept us alive while my advanced navigation nearly killed us all." They activated their improvised gravity drive 3 days later, with the entire crew holding their breath as exotic energies swirled around the ship. The Iron Wanderer groaned and shuddered as spacetime bent around her hull, but Rico's modifications held, and Celeste's calculations proved accurate. When they finally limped into port at Haven Station 6 weeks later, Rico and Celeste had become something more than colleagues. They'd become partners in the truest sense, two people who'd learned to combine their strengths while compensating for each other's weaknesses. "So," Rico said as they watched the station's repair crews swarm over their battered ship, "think you'll stay with the Iron Wanderer?" Celeste considered the question, her silver eyes reflecting the starlight streaming through the station's viewports. "I think I've learned that there's more to navigation than plotting courses through space. Sometimes the most important journey is learning to work with people who see the universe differently than you do." Rico smiled. "Is that a yes?" "That's a yes, Rico Thorne. Though I reserve the right to be insufferably smug when my calculations save our lives again." "Deal," Rico laughed. "As long as I get to be insufferably smug when my mechanical intuition keeps us from becoming space debris." As they shook hands on their new partnership, both of them knew they'd found something more valuable than safe passage through the stars. They'd found each other, and discovered that sometimes the greatest distances aren't measured in light years, but in the space between two hearts learning to trust. The Iron Wanderer would fly again, carrying her crew through dangers both known and unknown. But now she'd have something she'd never had before, a navigation team that understood both the mathematics of the stars and the poetry of the machines that carried them through the void. In the end, it wasn't superior knowledge or advanced technology that had saved them. It was two people learning to bridge the gap between different worlds, different ways of thinking, different hearts beating in the vast darkness of space. And in that darkness, they'd found light.